a Wikividi Documentaries production. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Enjoy. 2018 FIA Formula One World Championship. The 2018 FIA Formula One World Championship is an ongoing motor racing championship for Formula One cars which is recognized by the governing body of international motorsport, the Fédération Internationale de l'Automobile, as the highest class of competition for open-wheel racing cars. Drivers and teams are competing in 21 Grands Prix for the World Drivers and World Constructors' Championship titles. Lewis Hamilton is defending his World Drivers' Championship after winning his fourth championship title at the 2017 Mexican Grand Prix. His team, Mercedes, are the defending Constructors' Championship, having secured their fourth consecutive title at the 2017 United States Grand Prix. After one round, Sebastian Vettel leads Hamilton in the World Drivers' Championship by 7 points. Kimi Raikkonen is third, a further 3 points behind. In the World Constructors' Championship, Ferrari lead Mercedes by 18 points, with Red Bull Racing third. A revision of the sport's technical regulations means that a new cockpit protection device, commonly known as the Halo, was introduced for the 2018 championship. The introduction of the Halo in Formula One is the first stage of a planned rollout that would see the device adopted in all FIA-sanctioned open-wheel racing series by 2020. Team changes. McLaren terminated their engine partnership with Honda and instead signed a 3-year deal for power units supplied by Renault. The team cited Honda's repeated failure to supply a reliable and competitive power unit as the reason for ending the partnership. Toro Rosso parted ways with Renault, allowing McLaren to finalize their agreement with Renault, and came to an agreement to use Honda power units. As part of the deal, Red Bull Racing agreed to loan Toro Rosso driver Carlos Sainz Jr. to Renault's works team. Sauber renewed their partnership with Ferrari, upgrading to current specification power units after having used year-old power units in 2017. Driver changes. Toro Rosso signed 2016 GP2 Series champion Pierre Gasly and two-time World Endurance champion Brendan Hartley as their full-time drivers for 2018. Both Gasly and Hartley made their Formula One debuts with the team in the latter stages of the 2017 championship. Daniel Kvyat left the team and the Red Bull driver program, securing a development role with Ferrari. Charles Leclerc, the reigning Formula 2 champion, made his competitive debut with Sauber. Leclerc, who had previously driven in Friday practice sessions in 2016 and 2017, was hired by the team to replace Pascal Wehrlein. Wehrlein was ultimately unable to secure a race seat and was instead enlisted as one of Mercedes' test and reserve drivers while racing full-time in the Deutsche Tourenwagen Masters Series. Williams driver Felipe Massa retired from Formula One at the end of the 2017 championship. He was replaced by former Renault test driver and SMP Racing driver Sergei Sirotkin, made his competitive debut with the team. Calendar changes. The French Grand Prix returned to the calendar for the first time since. The race is due to return to the Circuit Paul Ricard, which last hosted the French Grand Prix and before the event moved to the Circuit des Nevers-Magny-Cours. The race is scheduled to be run in June, with the Azerbaijan Grand Prix brought forward to April to accommodate the change and to avoid clashing with celebrations for centenary of the Azerbaijan Republic. The German Grand Prix also returned to the championship after a 1-year absence, with the Hockenheimring scheduled to host the race. The Malaysian Grand Prix, which was part of the championship frontier, was discontinued. The Russian Grand Prix was moved from April to September, filling the vacancy left by the Malaysian Grand Prix. Sporting regulations. Following widespread criticism of the grid penalty system in 2017 that regularly saw multiple drivers start races outside their qualifying positions, the FIA introduced a revised set of regulations for 2018. In the event that a driver changes a power unit component, they are still subject to a 5 or 10-place grid penalty depending on the component being changed. However, should they then replace a second component, they will be moved to the back of the starting grid. If multiple drivers are moved to the back of the grid, their starting positions are determined by the order that components were changed based on the most recent change made by each driver. The rules governing starting procedures were changed for 2018, granting race stewards the power to issue penalties for improper race starts even if a driver's start does not trigger the automated detection system. The changes were introduced following two incidents during 2017, at the Chinese Grand Prix. Sebastian Vettel positioned his car too far across his grid slot to be registered by the detection system. While at the Austrian Grand Prix, Valtteri Bottas' start was called into question for his reaction time despite the detection system recognizing it as legal. In the event that a race is suspended due to a red flag, it will be restarted with a standing start. Drivers will return to the starting grid in the positions they held at the time of the suspension, and the race director will repeat the race start procedure. If circuit conditions are suitable for racing, but the race director deems a standing start inappropriate, the race will resume with a rolling start, where the safety car returns to pit lane and drivers proceed around the circuit in single file until they are shown the green flag. The FIA introduced tighter restrictions on racing licenses issued to drivers taking part in free practice sessions. Candidate drivers are required to complete a minimum number of Formula 2 races or earn 25 super license points over a 3-year period. The changes were introduced to address concerns about drivers who would not be able to meet the standards required to compete in Formula 1 having access to Formula 1 cars. The schedule of a Grand Prix weekend was changed, with the start time of most European races pushed back by 1 hour in a bid to try and accommodate a larger television audience. All races are scheduled to start at 10 minutes past the hour so as to allow broadcasters the opportunity for pre-race coverage when their broadcast of the race starts on the hour. Finally, the mid-season test, which was held in Bahrain in 2017, was moved to Barcelona. Technical regulations. Power unit suppliers are required to provide all teams using their engines with an identical specification of power units. The change was introduced to ensure parity after Mercedes Works team was observed to have access to additional engine performance settings that were not available to their customer teams. The quantity of power unit components a driver may use during the season was reduced from 4 complete power units during the entire season in 2017 to a new system, where each of the power unit components is considered separately. Therefore, in 2018, each driver is permitted to use up to 3 each of internal combustion engines, heat motor generator units, and turbochargers, and 2 each of the kinetic motor generator units, energy stores, and control electronics. Restrictions against the practice of oil burning, where engine oils are burned as fuel to boost performance, were also introduced. The practice, which was first used in 2017, saw teams burning as much as 1.2 liters per 100 kilometers. For the 2018 championship, this figure was revised down to a maximum of 0.6 liters per 100 kilometers. The rules were further amended to restrict teams to using a single specification of oil, which must be declared before the race. These oils are subject to stricter definitions of what is considered oil, in order to prevent teams from using exotic blends designed to boost performance. Teams are also required to inform the stewards of the mass of oil in each oil tank before the race. Further changes to the technical regulations require the temperature of air in the plenum chamber, adjacent to the turbocharger, to be no more than 10 degrees Celsius above the ambient air temperature. The rule was introduced in a bid to stop teams from artificially heating or cooling air for possible performance gains. Active control valves, which electronically regulate the flow of fluids between power unit components, will also be banned. The FIA banned the use of shark fins, a carbon fiber extension to the engine cowling aimed at directing airflow over the rear wing. The use of T-wings, a horizontal secondary wing mounted forward of and above the rear wing, was also banned. Driver safety. Following a series of serious incidents in open-wheel racing, including the fatal accidents of Henry Surtees and Justin Wilson, in which drivers were struck in the head by tires or debris, the FIA announced plans to introduce additional mandatory cockpit protection, with 2018 given as the first year for its introduction. Several solutions were tested, with the final design subject to feedback from teams and drivers. Each design was created to deflect debris away from a driver's head without compromising their visibility or the ability of safety marshals to access the cockpit and extract a driver and their seat in the event of a serious accident or medical emergency. With a series of serious accidents, such as the fatal accidents of Jules Bianchi and Dan Wheldon, recreated to simulate the ability of devices to withstand a serious impact. The FIA ultimately settled on the Halo, a wishbone-shaped frame mounted above and around the driver's head, and anchored to the monocoque forward of the cockpit. 17 accidents were examined as case studies, with the FIA concluding that the Halo would have prevented injuries in 15 of them. In the other 2 instances, most notably Jules Bianchi's fatal accident, the FIA concluded that although the Halo would not have prevented driver injuries, it would not have contributed to or complicated the outcome of the accidents. Once introduced, the Halo concept is scheduled to be applied to other FIA-sanctioned open-wheel racing categories included Formula 2, Formula 3 and Formula E. Following criticisms over the aesthetic value of the device, the FIA revealed plans to allow teams some design freedom in the final version of the Halo, with the device being incorporated into the chassis design from its inception rather than attached once the design was completed. The minimum weight of the chassis was raised in order to accommodate the additional weight of the Halo. The mandatory crash tests that each chassis must pass were adjusted to include a new static load test, in order to simulate a serious accident. A tire was mounted to a hydraulic ram and fired at the crash structure. To pass the test, the chassis and the mounting points for the Halo had to remain intact. In order to prevent teams from exploiting the Halo for aerodynamic gain and potentially compromising its purpose, the FIA banned teams from developing their own devices and instead required them to purchase prefabricated models from approved suppliers. The FIA made several changes to its trackside procedures to further accommodate the Halo. The time limit on the extraction test, the test of a driver extracting himself from the survival cell of a crashed car, was extended to allow drivers more time to escape. The starting gantries at selected circuits were also lowered to improve the visibility of the starting lights. Drivers are required to wear gloves containing biometric sensors which record their vital signs in order to better assist marshals and recovery crews in assessing their condition in the event of an accident. Brought to you by Wikividi Documentaries. Would you like to know more?